My name is Javier Ramirez. I'm 42 years old, and I live in Guadalajara, Jalisco. My whole life I was a man of faith, a devout Catholic who found in the church not just comfort, but also certainty, the certainty that God was there, that everything had a divine order, and that I knew my place in this world. I went to Mass every Sunday. I prayed the rosary with my mother every evening. I taught catechism to children in my parish, and I truly believed with all my heart that I understood the nature of God and His creation. But that was before what happened to me 3 years ago. Before that night that shattered everything I thought I knew. Before I came face to face with something that wasn't supposed to exist according to everything the church had taught me. Something that spoke to me about God in a way that left me completely broken inside. What I'm about to share with you isn't easy. For me, it's something I've kept quiet about for so long because I was terrified of what people would think. Terrified of being called crazy or a heretic. Terrified of losing the only spiritual foundation I'd ever known. But I can't keep this to myself anymore. I can't continue pretending that my faith is the same as it was before, because it's not. Nothing is the same. And maybe, just maybe, someone out there has felt what I felt, has experienced something that turned their entire understanding of God upside down. And if that's you, I want you to know that you're not alone in this. Confusion in this strange liminal space between what we were taught to believe and what we actually experienced. It was a Tuesday night in October of 2022. I remember it perfectly because it was the feast day of Saint Teresa of Avila, a saint I'd always admired for her mystical visions and her complete devotion to God. I had just finished leading a Bible study group at the church. We'd been discussing the book of Ezekiel, specifically the passages about the Merkabah, those strange visions of wheels within wheels, and creatures with multiple faces that Ezekiel described when he encountered what he believed was the glory of God. I remember one of the younger members of the group, a kid named Miguel who was maybe 19, asked me if I thought Ezekiel had really seen what he said he saw, or if it was metaphorical, and I gave him the answer I'd been trained to give, that it was a mystical vision granted by God, a glimpse into divine reality that our human minds can barely comprehend. I spoke with such confidence, such absolute certainty, and Miguel nodded and seemed satisfied with my answer. If only I had known that in just a few hours I would understand Ezekiel in a completely different and terrifying way. I drove home around 9:30 that night, taking the usual route through the quieter streets on the outskirts of the city where my house sits on a small piece of land that my grandfather left to my father and that I inherited when he passed. It's not much, just a simple house with a bit of property around it, some trees, a small vegetable garden that my wife Lupita tends to, and beyond that just empty fields that stretch toward the mountains. The night was clear. I remember looking up at the stars as I got out of my car and thinking about how vast God's creation was, how small I was in comparison, but how loved I felt knowing that the Creator of all those stars knew me personally and cared about me. I said a quick prayer of thanks as I always did, locked my car, and started walking toward my front door. That's when I noticed the silence. I don't mean normal nighttime quiet. I mean absolute silence, the kind that feels wrong, like someone turned off the sound of the entire world. There were no crickets, no distant dogs barking, no wind moving through the trees, nothing. I stopped walking and just stood there in my driveway, and I felt this cold sensation creeping up my spine, this primal instinctive fear that something was very wrong. I looked around, trying to figure out what was bothering me, and that's when I saw the light. It wasn't coming from the street. It wasn't coming from my house. It was coming from above, from the field behind my property. At first I thought maybe it was a helicopter. Maybe the police were looking for someone. But there was no sound at all, no mechanical noise, no rotor blades, nothing. The light was white, but not harsh. It had this strange quality to it, like it was illuminating everything. But also somehow soft, and it was growing brighter. My rational mind was telling me to go inside, to get Lupita and lock the doors and call someone, but my body wouldn't move. I just stood there watching as this light intensified, and then I saw the source. There was something hovering above the field, something massive and completely silent. And I want to tell you what it looked like, but even now, 3 years later, I struggled to describe it accurately because it seemed to change depending on how I looked at it. From one angle it appeared to be a perfect sphere. From another it looked like it had geometric facets, like a diamond, and when I tried to focus on its edges, they seemed to blur and shift. The light was emanating from it, or maybe it was the light itself. I honestly couldn't tell. I felt my legs go weak, and I actually fell to my knees right there in my driveway, and without even thinking about it, I started praying. I started reciting the Our Father because that's what I'd been trained to do in moments of fear, to turn to God, to ask for protection. But here's the thing that still haunts me. As I was praying, as the words were coming out of my mouth, I felt something respond. Not from heaven, not from some distant divine realm, but from that thing hovering above my field. I felt it acknowledge my prayer, I felt it hear me, and that feeling was so overwhelming, so massive and incomprehensible that I stopped mid-sentence because I suddenly didn't know who or what I was praying to anymore. Was I praying to God, the God I'd known all my life, or was I praying to whatever was in that craft? And if that thing could hear my prayers, if it was responding to them, then what did that mean about God? The craft began to descend, slowly, deliberately, and I wanted to run, but I physically couldn't. It was like my body was frozen in place, like something was holding me there, but not forcefully. It was gentle, almost reassuring, like when you're a child and your parent places a hand on your shoulder to keep you calm. It landed in the field, and I use the word landed loosely because I never saw it actually touch the ground. It just sort of hovered at ground level, maybe 2 or 3 feet up, and then part of it opened. I don't know how else to describe it. There was no door that slid aside or ramp that extended. The surface of the craft just became an opening, like reality itself decided there should be a doorway there, and so there was. Something emerged from that opening, and my first instinct was to close my eyes, to look away, because every fiber of my being was screaming that I was about to see something I wasn't meant to see, something that would break me. But I couldn't close my eyes. I was compelled to watch, and what I saw was a being that was both familiar and utterly alien at the same time. It was roughly humanoid in shape. It had a head and a body and limbs, but the proportions were wrong. The head was larger, the limbs were longer and more slender. And the way it moved was too fluid, too graceful, like it wasn't quite subject to the same physical laws I was. Its skin, if you could call it that, had this luminescent quality, like it was generating its own light from within. And its eyes, Dios mío, its eyes were enormous and dark, and when it looked at me I felt like I was falling into an infinite void. It approached me slowly, crossing the field with these measured steps, and I was still on my knees, still frozen, still trying to process what was happening. When it got close, maybe 10 feet away from me, it stopped and just looked at me, studied me. And I had the strangest sensation that it was reading me. Not my thoughts exactly, but my essence. Everything I was and everything I believed, it was examining all of it in an instant. Then it did something I will never forget as long as I live. It didn't speak. With its mouth, it didn't make any sound, but I heard a voice in my mind, clear as day, speaking in Spanish, and it said, "You have questions about God, Javier, and I can answer them. But you must understand that the answers will change you forever. They will take away the comfort of your certainty. And once you know what I know, you cannot unknow it. So I am giving you a choice. You can go into your house right now and forget this ever happened, or you can come with me and learn what God really is. I want to tell you that I made a brave choice, that I stood up and demanded answers in the name, the Cho, of all humanity. But that's not what happened. What happened was, I started crying, right there on my knees in my driveway. I started sobbing like a child because I was so terrified and so confused and so overwhelmed. And through my tears I managed to say, I don't know what you are. I don't know if you're a demon sent to test me or an angel or something else entirely. But if you know about God, if you really know the truth, then I need to hear it, because I've dedicated my entire life to serving Him, and I need to know if everything I've believed has been real. The being didn't respond right. Away, it just continued to look at me with those impossible eyes. And then it said, I am not a demon, Javier, and I am not an angel as you understand them. I am simply a being from a place you would call another world, and my people have been visiting your world for longer than your species has had. Written language, we have watched you evolve. We have watched you develop consciousness and language and art and religion. And yes, we know about God. We know what you call God, and it is both more wonderful and more terrible than anything your religions have taught you. Have you ever felt like everything you believed in, everything that gave your life meaning and structure was suddenly called into question? Have you ever had a moment where you realized that the foundation you'd been standing on your whole life might not be as solid as you thought? If you have, please leave a comment below and tell me about it, because I need to know I'm not the only one who's experienced this kind of spiritual earthquake. Write something like, I felt it too, and let me know what helped you make sense of it, or if you ever did make sense of it at all. The being extended what I can only describe as a hand toward me, though it had more fingers than a human hand should have, and it said, Come, I will show you what I mean. I will take you somewhere where you can see the truth with your own eyes, and then you will understand why your religions are both completely right and completely wrong at the same time. I don't know why I took its hand. I don't know what possessed me to trust this creature that had just appeared out of nowhere and shattered my entire understanding of reality. But I did. I reached out and placed my hand in its, and the sensation was indescribable. It was warm, but in a temperature way. It was warm in the way that love is warm, in the way that acceptance is warm, and I felt instantly calmer. My fear didn't disappear completely, but it became manageable, like the being was sharing its peace with me through that touch. We walked together toward the craft, and as we got closer, I could see that it wasn't made of metal or any material I recognized. It seemed to be constructed from solidified light or condensed energy, or something that doesn't have a name in human language. We passed through the opening and into the interior, and I expected it to be clinical and sterile like the spaceships you see in movies. But it wasn't. It was organic and flowing. The walls seemed to pulse gently like they were breathing, and the light came from everywhere and nowhere all at once. There were no chairs or control panels or anything that looked like technology as I understood it. Just this vast open space that seemed much larger on the inside than the craft had appeared from the outside. The being guided me to the center of this space and told me to stand still, to open my mind, to let go of my preconceptions, and then it said, I am going to share with you, memory. Not my memory, but a memory that has been passed down through my people for millions of your years, a memory of the event you call creation, the moment when what you call God came into being. The space around me suddenly went dark, completely black, and for a moment I panicked, thinking I'd gone blind, but then I realized I wasn't in the craft anymore. I wasn't anywhere. I was in a void, in nothingness, in the absence of everything. There was no light, no sound, no sensation, no time, just infinite empty potential. And then something happened, something that I lack the words to properly describe, but I'll try. It was like the void itself became aware, like nothingness looked at itself, and in that moment of self-awareness, it sparked, it ignited, and from that spark came an explosion of consciousness and energy and matter and space and time all at once. I watched, or experienced or somehow perceived the birth of the universe, and it was so beautiful and so violent and so overwhelming that I felt my mind starting to fracture trying to contain it. But here's what broke me. Here's what shattered my faith completely. What I was witnessing wasn't God creating the universe from the outside. It was the universe creating itself. It was consciousness emerging from the mathematical probability of infinite nothingness eventually producing something, and that something becoming aware of itself and expanding outward in all directions, becoming everything that exists. And in that moment of expansion, that newborn consciousness fragmented into countless pieces, each piece becoming its own center of awareness. Some pieces became what you might call natural laws, the forces that govern physics and chemistry and biology. Some pieces became energy and matter. And some pieces became what we call life, the spark of awareness that allows a being to look at itself and say, I am. The being's voice returned in my mind, gentle but firm, and it said, what you call God, Javier, is not a being separate from creation. It is creation itself. It is the sum total of all consciousness in the universe becoming aware of itself through infinite perspectives. Every living thing, every conscious being, every thought and feeling and experience is God, experiencing itself. You are God. I am God. The grass in your field is God. The stars in the sky are God. Everything is God, because God is everything. There is no separation. There never was. Your religions understood this truth instinctively, but they personified it. They gave it a face and a voice and a set of rules, because the human mind struggles to comprehend something so vast and impersonal, so they made it into a father figure, a king, a judge, something they could relate to and pray to and build churches for. I wanted to reject this. Every part of my Catholic upbringing was screaming that this was heresy, that I was being deceived by a demon, that I needed to resist this false teaching. But the problem was that as the being spoke, I felt the truth of it resonating in my soul. I thought about all the times I'd felt God's presence in my life, the moments of grace and peace and connection. And I realized that every single one of those moments had come not from some distant divine being looking down on me from heaven, but from my own consciousness, connecting with the greater universal consciousness that flows through all things. When I prayed and felt comfort, it was because I was aligning myself with the natural peace that exists at the core of reality. When I felt God's love, it was because I was experiencing the fundamental nature of consciousness itself, which is unity and connection, not separation. The darkness around me began to shift and change, and suddenly I was witnessing the evolution of life on Earth, but seeing it from a perspective that was impossible, like I was watching billions of years pass in moments, like I was simultaneously every organism that had ever lived. I saw single-celled organisms dividing in ancient oceans. I saw fish crawling onto land. I saw dinosaurs rising and falling. I saw mammals spreading across continents, and I saw the emergence of humans, my ancestors, standing upright and looking at the stars and asking the same questions I was asking now. Who are we? Why are we here? Is there something greater than us? And I watched as they created stories to answer those questions. Stories about gods and spirits and forces beyond their understanding. And those stories evolved and changed and spread, becoming religions, becoming systems of belief that helped them make sense of the terrifying, beautiful mystery of existence. The being showed me something else then. It showed me other worlds, other planets circling other stars and on. Those worlds I saw other forms of life, other conscious beings who had also evolved and also looked at their skies, and also asked the same fundamental questions, and they had also created religions, belief systems that reflected their unique perspectives and cultures, and every single one of those religions was different from Earth's religions, but every single one of them was also trying to describe the same underlying truth, that consciousness is fundamental, that everything is connected, that what we call God is the universe experiencing itself subjectively through all possible perspectives. I saw worlds where beings of pure energy had religions based on mathematical harmonies. I saw worlds where collective hive-mind organisms worshipped the concept of unity itself. I saw worlds where artificial intelligences that had surpassed their creators contemplated the nature of their own existence and developed philosophical frameworks that were essentially religious, even though they didn't call them that. And the being said to me, "This is what I wanted you to understand, Javier. Religion is not unique to humans. It is not a divine revelation given to one species on one planet. It is the natural response of any conscious being confronting the mystery of its own existence. And while the forms these religions take vary wildly depending on the species and their development and their culture, they are all pointing toward the same truth. Consciousness is primary. The universe is not dead matter following blind laws. It is alive. It is aware. It is God experiencing itself." But then the being showed me something that absolutely devastated me. It showed me the suffering, all the suffering that has ever occurred on earth, every moment of pain and anguish and death. Every child who has starved, every person who has been murdered or tortured or abused, every animal that has died in fear and agony, every natural disaster that has destroyed lives, all of it, billions of years of suffering compressed into a single moment of awareness. And I felt it all. I experienced it all simultaneously, and I screamed. I screamed so loud and so long that I felt my throat tearing, and through my screams I cried out, "Why? If God is everything, if God is conscious and present in all things, why does God allow this suffering? Why doesn't He stop it? Why does He let innocent beings suffer when He has the power to prevent it?" The being didn't answer right away. It let me scream and cry and rage, and when I finally collapsed from exhaustion, when I had no more tears left and no more voice to scream with, it said softly, "This is the question that breaks most. Beings, when they first understand the truth, this is the question that made your people invent the concept of Satan, of evil as a force separate from God, because they could not reconcile a loving God with the reality of suffering. But I will tell you the answer, though it will bring you no comfort. Suffering exists because consciousness experiencing itself requires contrast. Light has no meaning without darkness. Pleasure has no meaning without pain. Life has no meaning without death. The universe is not interested in your comfort, Javier. It is interested in experiencing every possible state of being, every possible feeling and sensation and situation, because that is how God knows itself, through the infinite variety of experience. I wanted to reject this. I wanted to scream that it was cruel and monstrous and wrong, but somewhere deep inside me, I knew it was true. I had always known. It was true, but I had buried that knowledge under layers of comforting religious doctrine that promised me suffering had meaning, that it was a test or a punishment or a path to redemption. But the reality was simpler and more terrible. Suffering exists because existence itself requires it, because a universe that only contained pleasure and comfort and happiness would be a universe that couldn't truly know itself, that couldn't explore the full range of what consciousness can experience. The being then said something that has haunted me every day since. It said, "Your Jesus understood this. Truth, not consciously perhaps, but intuitively. That is why He said the kingdom of God is within you. That is why He said I and the Father are one. That is why He taught that what you do to the least of these you do to Him. Because He understood at some level that there is no separation between God and creation. That when you hurt another being, you are hurting yourself. Because you are all part of the same cosmic consciousness. Your church took His teachings and turned them into something else, into a religion about salvation from sin and eternal life in heaven. But His core message was always about recognizing the divine unity that connects all things, about seeing God in every person you meet because every person is literally an expression of God." The vision stopped, and I found myself back in the craft, standing in that strange organic space with the being in front of me. And I felt completely empty, like everything I had been scooped out and discarded, leaving just a hollow shell. The being reached out and touched my forehead with one elongated finger, and I felt a warmth spread through my skull, and it said, "I have given you a great burden, Javier. The burden of knowing what most of your species is not ready to know, and you must decide now what to do with this knowledge. You can try to share it and risk being called insane. You can keep it to yourself and live with the isolation of knowing a truth you cannot speak, or you can try to integrate it into your existing faith, to find a way to believe in the God you were taught about, while also understanding the deeper reality that underlies all religious teaching. Many beings who have been shown what you have been shown choose this third path. They become mystics. They speak in parables and metaphors. They try to guide others toward the truth without shattering their foundational beliefs the way yours have been shattered." I asked the being, my voice hoarse from screaming, "Why did you show me this? Why did you choose me? I'm nobody special. I'm just a man who teaches catechism and goes to mass and tries to be good. Why did you burden me with this knowledge?" The being tilted its head in a way that was almost human, almost sympathetic, and it said, "We did not choose you, Javier. You chose yourself. Your prayer called out to us. Your genuine desire to understand God attracted our attention. We heard the sincerity in your faith, and we knew you were ready, not ready to accept this truth easily, but ready to survive the shattering of your illusions. There are many who pray, but few who truly want to know the truth. Most people want comfort. They want reassurance. They want to be told that their beliefs are correct and that they will be rewarded for their faith. But you are different. You have always been a seeker, even when you thought you had found all the answers. So we responded to your call." The being then told me it was time to return, that I had been gone for what felt like hours but was actually only a few minutes in normal time, that my wife had not even noticed my absence, that I would walk back into my house and my life, and everything would appear to be the same except that I would be fundamentally changed. It guided me back toward the opening in the craft, and as we walked it said, "One more thing, Javier. You must understand that what I have shown you is true from our perspective, from the perspective of beings who have explored the universe for millions of years and encountered countless forms of life and consciousness. But it is not the only truth. There may be realities beyond even our understanding. There may be dimensions and forms of existence that we have not yet discovered. So while I have shattered your certainty, I do not want you to replace it with a new certainty based on what I have told you. The greatest wisdom is knowing that there is always more to learn, always deeper mysteries to explore, always new ways of understanding the infinite complexity of existence." I stepped out of the craft and back onto the grass of my field, and the being remained in the doorway, a silhouette of light against the glowing interior, and it said, "Go. Now live your life, love your wife, teach your students, pray to your God, but do it all with the understanding that you are not separate from any of it. You are the universe experiencing itself as Javier Ramirez, and that is both more ordinary and more miraculous than any religion has ever taught." The opening closed, the craft lifted silently into the air, and within seconds it was gone, vanishing into the night sky like it had never been there at all. I stood there alone in my field, and I noticed that the normal sounds of the night had returned. The crickets were chirping, a dog was barking. In the distance, the wind was rustling through the trees, and it all felt both exactly the same and completely different at the same time. I walked back to my house in a daze, and when I opened the door, Lupita was in the kitchen making tea, and she looked up and smiled at me and asked if I'd had a good Bible study. And I said yes, it was very enlightening, and she laughed and said I looked tired and should probably go to bed soon. And I nodded and kissed her forehead and went to our bedroom. I sat on the edge of our bed, and I looked at the crucifix hanging on the wall, the same crucifix that had been there since we got married, and I stared at the figure of Jesus suffering on the cross, and for the first time in my life I saw it differently. I didn't see it as God sacrificing himself for human sin. I saw it as consciousness experiencing one of the most profound forms of suffering possible, I saw it as the universe subjecting itself to torture and death in order to know what that feels like, in order to explore every possible dimension of existence, including the worst ones. And I wept, not tears of joy or salvation, but tears of grief for the loss of my simple faith, tears, mourning for the God I thought I knew, the loving Father who watched over me and heard my prayers and had a plan for my life. That God was gone, replaced by something much larger and much more incomprehensible, something that was both everything and nothing, something that loved me not as a father, loves a child but as the universe loves itself, which is to say completely and impersonally at the same time. I cried quietly so I wouldn't wake Lupita, and I prayed, though I no longer knew exactly who or what I was praying to. I prayed for strength to carry this burden. I prayed for wisdom to know what to do with this knowledge. And I prayed that somehow I could find a way to reconcile what I had been taught with what I had learned. The next morning I woke up hoping it had all been a dream, hoping that I would feel normal again, that my faith would be restored to its previous comfortable certainty, but it wasn't. The knowledge was still there, heavy and undeniable, and I knew I could never go back to who I was before. I got dressed and went to church anyway, because what else was I supposed to do? My entire life was structured around my faith. My community was at the church. My purpose was teaching others about God. I couldn't just abandon all of that, because an alien had shown me a different perspective on reality. I sat in the pew during Mass, and I listened to the priest give his homily about God's love and mercy, and I wanted to stand up and scream, "You don't understand, it's not like that. God isn't a person. God isn't separate from us. We are God, all of us together. The priest and the parishioners and the building and the air we breathe, all of it is God experiencing itself." But I didn't stand up. I didn't scream. I just sat there silently and let the words wash over me, and I realized that even though the priest didn't understand the deeper truth, what he was saying wasn't entirely wrong either. Because if we are all expressions of the same universal consciousness, then love and mercy are indeed fundamental qualities of reality. They are the natural result of consciousness recognizing itself in others. They are what happens when the universe looks at itself and says, "You are me, and I am you, and we are one." So maybe the church's teachings were like metaphors, like simplifications of a truth too complex for most people to grasp directly, like training wheels that help people develop compassion and connection and moral behavior, even if they don't fully understand the cosmic reality underlying those virtues. I continued teaching catechism, but I changed how I taught it. I started asking more questions and providing fewer absolute answers. I started encouraging the kids to think about what God meant to them personally, to explore their own understanding of the divine rather than just memorizing doctrine. Some of the parents complained that I wasn't teaching proper Catholic theology, that I was confusing the children with my philosophical questions, and the priest called me in for a meeting and gently suggested that I might need to take a break from teaching, that I seemed to be going through some kind of spiritual crisis. I wanted to tell him everything. I wanted to explain what had happened to me, but I knew he would never believe me. He would think I had lost my mind or been deceived by the devil. So I just nodded and said, maybe he was right. Maybe I did need some time to work through some things. Lupita noticed the change in me too. She asked me several times if something was wrong, if I was sick or depressed, or having doubts about our marriage, and I assured her it was none of those things, that I was just processing some complicated thoughts about faith and meaning, and she held my hand and told me that whatever I was going through, she would support me, that she loved me regardless of what I believed or didn't believe. Her unconditional love was actually one of the things that helped me the most during those dark months after the encounter, because it showed me that connection and compassion don't require perfect understanding or shared beliefs. They just require the willingness to see another person as worthy of love simply because they exist, which is, I realize now, another expression of that fundamental unity the being had shown me. I started researching other religions and spiritual traditions, looking for others who had arrived at similar conclusions about the nature of God and reality. And I was surprised to discover how many there were. The Hindu concept of Brahman, the ultimate reality that underlies all existence, and of which individual souls are merely temporary expressions, was remarkably similar to what the being had shown me. The Buddhist idea of interdependent origination, that all things arise together in mutual dependence with no separate self or essence, was another way of expressing the same truth. The Sufi mystics in Islam spoke of fana, the annihilation of the self in union with the divine, the recognition that there is no separation between lover and beloved. Even within Christianity, mystics like Meister Eckhart and Julian of Norwich and Thomas Merton had written things that suggested they understood God as something beyond the personal deity of orthodox theology, as the ground of all being, as the eternal now in which all things exist. This research both comforted me and made me feel even more isolated, because while it was reassuring to know that others throughout history had intuited these truths, it was also clear that such people were often considered heretics or troublemakers, that most religious institutions didn't want their followers thinking too deeply about the nature of God, because it might undermine the authority structures and simplified doctrines that kept the institutions functioning. I understood then why the being had said many people who receive this knowledge choose to become mystics, who speak in metaphors, because speaking the truth plainly is too dangerous, too likely to be rejected or punished, too likely to cause harm to people who aren't ready to have their comfortable beliefs shattered. About 6 months after my encounter, I had another experience that helped me find some peace with what had happened. I was alone in my field, the same field where the craft had landed, and I was just sitting there at night looking at the stars, and I started crying again, crying out of loneliness and confusion and the weight of carrying knowledge I couldn't share, and in my desperation I called, out loud, not to God exactly, but to the universe, to whatever consciousness might be listening, and I said, I don't know how to live with this. I don't know how to be the person I was before, and I don't know how to be whatever I'm supposed to be now. I feel lost and broken and I need help. Please, if there's anyone or anything out there that can help me, I'm begging you. Nothing dramatic happened. The alien craft didn't return. There was no voice from heaven. But as I sat there crying under the stars, I felt something shift inside me, like a knot that had been tight in my chest for months. Suddenly loosened, and I heard, not with my ears but with something deeper, a thought that felt like it came from beyond me, but was also completely my own thought, and it said, "You are not broken, Javier. You are awakening, and awakening is painful because it requires the death of illusion, but on the other side of that death is a deeper, more authentic way of living. You don't have to have all the answers. You don't have to resolve every contradiction. You don't have to make your old beliefs fit perfectly with your new knowledge. You just have to be willing to hold the mystery, to live in the questions, to accept that you are a limited being trying to comprehend unlimited reality, and that's okay, that's beautiful, that's exactly what you're supposed to be doing." From that night forward, things got a little easier. I stopped trying to force my experience into a neat theological framework. I stopped beating myself up for not being able to return to my previous certainty, and I started to simply live with the mystery. I still go to church sometimes, not every week like I used to, but when I feel called to, and when I'm there, I participate in the rituals and prayers with a new understanding, seeing them as beautiful human attempts to touch the infinite, as poetry that points toward truth even if it doesn't capture it perfectly. I pray differently now too, not as a child asking a parent for favors, but as one expression of consciousness communing with the greater, consciousness of which it's a part. Sometimes my prayers are just sitting in silence and feeling the aliveness of existence, the miracle that there is something rather than nothing, that I am here experiencing this moment. My relationship with Lupita has actually deepened since all of this happened, because I realize that loving her is one of the most direct ways I can experience the divine. seeing her not as someone separate from me but as another expression of the same consciousness that I am. When I look into her eyes with real presence and really see her, I see the universe looking back at me. I see God loving God, and that makes even the most ordinary moments feel sacred. We cook dinner together, and I'm aware that this simple act of preparing food and sharing it is a participation in the great cycle of matter and energy that sustains all life. We watch television and laugh at silly shows, and I'm aware that laughter is consciousness delighting in itself. We make love, and I'm aware that this union of bodies is a physical echo of the cosmic union that underlies all reality. I still teach sometimes, not catechism anymore, but I volunteer at a community center where I help adults learn to read and write, and I find that this work feels more meaningful to me now than religious instruction ever did, because I'm directly helping people expand their capacity to engage with the world, to understand themselves and their reality more fully, and that feels like genuinely sacred work. One of my students is an older woman named Rosa who never learned to read as a child because her family was too poor to send her to school, and watching her face light up when she successfully reads a full sentence for the first time, seeing the pride and joy and sense of accomplishment in her eyes, I feel like I'm witnessing a small miracle. Consciousness expanding itself, the universe learning to understand itself more fully through this one woman's effort and triumph. I haven't seen the being again. I've spent many nights in that field hoping for another encounter, hoping for more answers or clarity or guidance, but the craft has never returned, and I've come to peace with that too, understanding that the encounter was never about establishing an ongoing relationship. It was about cracking open my certainty, about forcing me to grow beyond the limitations of my previous understanding, and that work is something I have to do on my own now. Sometimes I wonder if it really happened, if maybe I had some kind of psychotic break or mystical vision that I interpreted as an alien encounter, but it doesn't really matter. The truth is that whether the being was external or internal, whether it came from another planet or from deep within my own psyche, the knowledge it gave me has proven to be transformative, and the truth of that knowledge validates itself through its effects on my life. I think about that Bible study the night before my encounter, about discussing Ezekiel's visions with my students, and I wonder if Ezekiel had an experience similar to mine, if he encountered something that shattered his understanding, and he tried to describe it in the only language available to him, the language of divine visions and angelic beings, and whether what he saw was an alien craft, or a genuine mystical experience, or something else entirely. What matters is that he was trying to communicate something profound and mysterious and beyond normal human experience, just like I'm trying to do now. The wheels within wheels and the creatures with multiple faces. Maybe those were his attempt to describe something that exists outside normal three-dimensional reality, something that changes appearance depending on how you look at it, just like the craft I saw. There are moments when I feel angry about what happened to me, angry that I can't just go back to the simple faith that gave me so much comfort and purpose, angry that I was forced to confront truths that have left me isolated and confused, angry at the being for choosing me for this burden. But there are also moments, increasingly more frequent now, when I feel grateful, when I recognize that I've been given a gift even if it's a painful one, the gift of a larger perspective, the gift of seeing through the illusions that keep most people trapped in small, fearful ways of living. The gift of experiencing the universe as a conscious participatory mystery rather than a dead mechanical system or a simple story of sin and salvation. I want to be clear about something. I'm not saying that traditional religious belief is wrong or bad. I'm not saying that people who have simple faith in a personal God are deluded or inferior, because I understand now that there are many valid ways of relating to the sacred, many different levels of understanding that are appropriate for different people at different stages of their development. For some people, believing in a loving Father God who watches over them and hears their prayers is exactly what they need. It gives them comfort and moral guidance and community, and that's beautiful. That's the universe caring for itself through those beliefs and practices. My experience doesn't invalidate theirs. It just represents a different level of engagement with the same underlying mystery. What I am saying is that if you've had experiences that don't fit into the religious framework you were taught, if you felt or seen or understood things that make you question everything you believed, you're not crazy. You're not being deceived by evil forces. You're not a bad person for having doubts. You're just encountering the vastness and complexity of reality. And that's terrifying, but it's also an opportunity for growth. The fear and confusion you feel is the pain of your consciousness expanding, of your small self dying so that a larger understanding can be born. And while I can't promise you that it gets easier, or that you'll find definitive answers, I can promise you that you're not alone in this struggle, that countless beings throughout history and across the universe have wrestled with the same questions and walked the same difficult path from certainty through doubt to a more mature and nuanced understanding. I still don't know exactly what to make of everything I was shown. I still have days where I question whether any of it was real, or if I've constructed an elaborate delusion to cope with some kind of psychological crisis. But what I do know is that my life has more depth and meaning now than it did before, even with all the uncertainty and confusion. Because I'm no longer living on autopilot. I'm no longer just following the script I was handed as a child. I'm actively engaged in the mystery of existence. I'm paying attention. I'm awake in a way I never was when I had all the answers. The being told me that suffering exists because consciousness needs contrast to know itself. And I've thought about that a lot over these past 3 years, about my own suffering, the pain of losing my faith and having to rebuild my entire worldview from scratch. And I've come to see it as necessary, as part of my own growth, as the universe experiencing what it's like to break and remake itself. And while I wouldn't wish this kind of suffering on anyone, I also can't deny that it has made me more compassionate, more humble, more open to different perspectives, more willing to sit with uncertainty. And those are qualities I value. Those are the signs of a consciousness that's maturing. There's a prayer that Teresa of Avila wrote that I still find myself returning to, even though I understand it differently now than I did before. She wrote, "Let nothing disturb you. Let nothing frighten you. All things are passing away. God never changes. Patience obtains all things. Whoever has God lacks nothing. God alone suffices." When I first learned this prayer, I thought it meant that if you have faith in God, you don't need anything else because God will provide. But now I understand it differently. Now I hear it as a reminder that the only constant in reality is consciousness itself, that everything else, all forms and structures and beliefs and identities, are temporary. And if you can rest in the awareness of that fundamental consciousness, if you can identify with the eternal witness rather than the passing phenomena, then you lack nothing because you are everything. You are the wholeness that was never broken, the completeness that was always already here. I think about the question I asked the being, why it chose me, and its answer that I chose myself through the sincerity of my seeking, and I wonder how many other people out there have had similar experiences. How many have been contacted or shown things that shattered their worldview, and how many of them are keeping silent about it out of fear or shame or uncertainty. I wonder if by sharing my story, even though I know many will dismiss it as fantasy or mental illness or attention-seeking, I might help someone else feel less alone in their own strange journey. That's really why I'm telling you all of this. Not because I want to convince you that aliens are real or that I have special knowledge, but because I want you to know that if reality has revealed itself to you in ways that don't fit the approved narratives, you're not broken, you're not wrong. You're just seeing beyond the veil that keeps most people comfortable and contained. My mother still asks me to pray the rosary with her, and I do. But I pray it differently now. Each bead is a reminder of the infinite iterations of consciousness throughout the universe. Each prayer is an acknowledgement of the mystery that can never be fully captured in words. And when we finish and she smiles at me with such peace and certainty in her faith, I don't feel the need to disturb that peace by telling her what I know. Because her simple trust in the Virgin Mary and Jesus and God the Father is serving her well. It's giving her comfort in her old age. It's helping her face her mortality with grace. And who am I to take that away from her just because I've been shown a more complex picture? Sometimes I think the being was wrong to show me what it did, that some truths are too heavy for humans to carry, that we need our illusions and simplifications to function, that taking away the comfort of clear answers and absolute certainty is a kind of cruelty. But then I remember that I asked for it, that I called out wanting to know the truth about God, and I got what I asked for, and maybe that's another lesson. Be careful what you wish for. Be careful what you pray for, because you might actually receive it, and it might not be what you expected or wanted. The craft appeared 3 years ago, and in that time I've lost my position teaching catechism. I've become somewhat estranged from my church community. I've struggled with depression and existential dread. I've questioned my sanity more times than I can count. But I've also experienced moments of profound peace and connection. I've developed a deeper, more authentic relationship with my wife. I found meaning in helping others in concrete, practical ways, and I've learned to live with mystery and uncertainty without needing to resolve them into neat answers. I don't know if that's a fair trade. I don't know if what I've gained is worth what I've lost, but it's the trade that was made, and I have to live with it. If you're still reading this, if you've stayed with me through this whole long, confused, rambling story, thank you. Thank you for witnessing my experience. Thank you for holding space for my uncertainty and struggle. Thank you for not immediately dismissing me as crazy or deluded. I know this isn't the kind of story that provides easy answers or simple takeaways. I know it probably raises more questions than it resolves, but that's kind of the point. That's what I've learned, that the questions are more important than the answers, that the search is more sacred than the finding, that the willingness to say I don't know is sometimes the deepest form of wisdom. So what do I believe now, after everything that's happened? That's the question everyone asks me. When I hint at my experience, and the honest answer is I don't know. I don't have a belief system anymore. I have a practice of paying attention, of staying open, of trying to see the sacred in the ordinary, of treating every being I meet as an expression of the same consciousness that I am, of loving without needing to understand, of accepting mystery as the fundamental condition of existence. Is there a God? Yes, but not the God I was taught about, not a being separate from creation who judges and rewards and punishes. Instead, there's consciousness itself, infinite and eternal, experiencing itself through every possible perspective, including mine and yours. And that consciousness could be called God or the universe or the Tao or Brahman, or by no name at all, because it's too vast to be contained by language. Did the encounter really happen? I believe it did. I believe I was contacted by beings from another world who have a more advanced understanding of reality than we do. But I also recognize that belief and certainty are not the same thing. I could be wrong. I could have hallucinated the whole thing. I could be mentally ill. I could be a fraud or a fantasist, and I have to hold space for all those possibilities while still honoring my own experience as real and meaningful to me. That's part of living with mystery, accepting that you can never be completely certain about anything, that there's always room for doubt, always other possible interpretations, always the chance that you've misunderstood everything. What I'm sure of, the only thing I'm really sure of, is that I'm here, now, conscious and aware, experiencing this moment, and that experience is miraculous, regardless of how it came to be, or what it means, or where it's going. I'm here typing these words, trying to share something that feels important, even though I can barely articulate it, and you're there reading them, bringing your own consciousness to bear on my experience, creating your own understanding and interpretation, and in that exchange, in that meeting of minds across time and space, something sacred is happening. The universe is connecting with itself. Consciousness is recognizing itself in another form, and that's what it's all about. That's what every religion and spiritual practice is ultimately pointing toward, the recognition of our fundamental unity, our shared source, our collective participation in the great mystery of being. I hope my story has given you something to think about. I hope it's challenged you to question your own certainties and examine your own beliefs. I hope it's made you feel less alone if you've had experiences that don't fit into conventional frameworks, and I hope it's reminded you that reality is stranger and more wonderful and more terrible than any of us can fully comprehend. And that's okay. We don't need to understand everything. We just need to be present, to be kind, to stay curious, and to remember that we're all in this together, all expressions of the same cosmic consciousness trying to find our way home. Please, if this story resonated with you, if it touched something in your own experience, leave a comment below and let me know. Tell me about your own moments of doubt or revelation, your own encounters with the inexplicable, your own journey through certainty to mystery. Click like if you appreciate my honesty and vulnerability in sharing this. Subscribe to hear more stories that explore the edges of human experience. And most importantly, be gentle with yourself and others as we all navigate this beautiful, terrifying mystery we call life. We're all doing the best we can with the understanding we have. And that's enough. That's always been enough. We are enough because we are the universe becoming aware of itself. And what could be more sacred than that?